Futurama comic, issue 72. Leela tempts fate, saying that this was the most relaxing delivery. Somehow Bender doesn't even mind that the stinky, dusty aliens only paid in hugs. They high-five, and get a distress signal from a ship that's being sucked into a black hole. Fry wants to just ignore it. That would be smart, but Leela decides to save them. She says she's locking onto their coordinates, and the distress signal's coming from Zap. And the reason she didn't recognize his voice immediately is that he wasn't screaming like a little girl anymore. He says he got himself into this mess by staging his own rescue of another vessel circling the black hole, which is a Star Tours space bus. Leela says she has an idea that she thinks is absurd, but she's desperate enough to try it anyways. The ship appears to leave. Kip says something's happening to the black hole, and the ship comes back. And Leela tells Fry to snare the Nimbus with a tractor beam. It's said that Leela defied science fact to save the day. It could be explained that there was a wizard spell on the ship to explain this. This is a universe where body-switching magic necklaces exist. Morbo reports on Leela saving tons of lives, and said that Leela turned the black hole inside out. She insults Zap on TV, and Nixon says Brannigan's done it now, and stupidly gets Spiro to destroy his TV. He says this is the last time they'll clean up one of Zap's messes. Stop teasing me with false hope. The series is just as allergic to changing the status quo as The Simpsons. What's wrong with changing the norm to be less annoying and hopeless? He wants to do something to erase this bureaucratic black eye. And he fires Zap personally. And predictably, Leela's gonna get put in a position where she'll get to save more lives in space. She's gonna get given the job as captain, even though she's not trained for it, just because of what she did one time. Zap finally gets fired. I guess this won't last because Leela will discover that's hard to be a captain. Leela says she'll just have a new uniform made instead of wearing Zap's, after he's unrealistically made to take off all of his clothes and walk out of the building like that. Kid says they're very excited to have Leela leading them, and he's gathered a bunch of people, and each soldier is going to waste her time with one question for her. I feel bad for her because what do they expect her to say when she's just gotten hired and doesn't know anything about this place? Their questions make it clear how impossibly bad a job Zap's been doing. They were expected to use laser tag rifles. I don't remember that. Farnsworth tries to do an interview for Leela's replacement, instead of making a clone or robot Leela. And a robot shows up for it somehow, even though he's never flown a spaceship before. Hermie says he'll contact him about not getting the job. He wouldn't say that. He'd know it'd get him furious. And he would be furious, not act like he didn't hear him say he wouldn't get the job. Zap shows up wanting the job without even filling an application first. It makes sense that he'd be here because he assumes that Leela will visit her friends, so she'd visit him. He thinks Leela's gonna do a terrible job, and Fry likes the idea of helping him prove Leela's incompetence because he wants Leela back. Zap says he accepts an offer that wasn't given to him yet, and somehow Hermes and Farnsworth don't speak up to contradict them and tell him how low his salary will be. Kip enjoys getting a tea break, and Leela makes a toast to a successful, peaceful first week. Nixon says she's won the Captain of the Week award for setting the Nimbus's record number of consecutive days without casualties. There's a distress call coming in from the dupe-protected territory of Cybertron. An embarrassingly cliche sci-fi name. Leela says they need to defend it. Kip says there may be casualties, and Leela says a little excitement won't hurt anyone. Kip tries to warn her that she sounds like Zap. You'd think she would immediately change her mind. I wish I got to say that the reason she's not like Zap is that she's trying to engage in the fight because defending people who need defending is the right thing to do and worth the sacrifice. Well, Zap just does it for the fame and obligation to the job. Instead, the story is gonna have me believe that she's no better than Zap, when she actually has a good reason to get involved. It's for the same reason that she decided to rescue Zap. There's no way she'd be able to do her job without risking casualties. They do have a good reason to look worried when she says that someone needs to clear a space on the bookshelf for a trophy. It sounds arrogant of her when she should do that herself. Over the next few weeks, she tells people to go to various places. She wants to send people after a giant space centipede they'll be fighting. Well, she could have a good reason for this, because a centipede sounds like something that'll be a danger to innocent people. Uncharacteristically, Leela doesn't care when she's told that her soldiers are being held captive, even though she's the same person who thought saving someone from a black hole was a good idea. They lose over 90% of their platoon, and somehow, she decided to trade their communications officer for a pizza. There's no way she'd be this stupid. She's always portrayed as the level-headed one with common sense. This should have been Fry or Bender. Leela's gaining weight from all of the eating and lack of exercise. She refuses to return to Earth and regroup because there's battles to wage. Kif says they're out of soldiers, and Leela somehow can't do basic math. This is blatantly bad writing. Use one of the idiot characters for this kind of story. Kif calls for help, and Leela pilots the ship towards a laser-wielding space station, and she unrealistically decided to radio their captain and taunt him into wanting a fight. Her dialogue is something that Bender would say instead of her. Kif tries to stop her, saying that one shot from that space station will destroy everything within 10 light years. That's pretty magical. And Leela uncharacteristically doesn't listen to reason and says she's not a coward. Zap shows up, with no explanation for how he did that so easily just because of a phone call. Leela gets shown herself in the mirror and wonders how she could let this happen. Yeah, how? They see that they're in danger, and Zap tells Fry and Bender to fetch those mirrors that were going to be delivered to the Funhouse planet. I like that that's why Fry had that mirror on hand right when he happened to need it. So the laser gets reflected by the mirrors, and Leela tells Nixon that all of this happened because of her lust for power. That's still out of character. Futurama comic, issue 73. Bender gets woken up by Fry and Leela because it's time to go to work. At first they act menacing, which must have just been a joke of theirs. Bender's told that only he can do a delivery to a robot planet that wants all of the humans destroyed. He's given a surgical mask for his own protection because every robot on the entire planet has come down with a nasty cold. Which is why they've ordered a giant supply of robot chicken soup. Because robots can get colds. It must have been a computer virus. Bender wants to get the cold so that he can take some sick days. Bender sits on the can that's in the escape hatch and tells Leela to open the escape hatch, sending him falling out of the ship. And Fry worries that Bender won't make it when he hits the ground. Somehow Bender's annoyed that Leela deployed his emergency chute. He gets hit by a metal object and delivers the can, and hugs the robot in front of him to try to get sick. I wonder if the twist will be that he won't get sick. That kind of makes sense because he's not a robot from their planet. Hermes says that the casual Friday dress code must include underwear. This would have been the case from the start. Bender complains that he's not sick, and Farnsworth says he's removing that virus from his system right now, because rather than assuming that he's immune to it, which would be simple, he assumes that it's evolving into something more lethal, even though it's a computer virus, so it doesn't have any material to mutate. Wouldn't make sense if it was a bunch of nanomachines either. They don't have genetic code like RNA or DNA that can mutate. You can be immune and still spread a virus, that's what Typhoid Mary was in trouble for, and that'd make more sense than this. Somehow Farnsworth tells Bender that he eliminated sick days, which wouldn't be legal. He just thinks he can get away with anything because none of them want to lose their job. But he should know that the minute he fires one of them, and they spend too long without being able to get their job back that they want so badly, they'll give up on getting their job back, and they'll have every reason to take him to court for being a bad boss. I don't know why the series keeps having Farnsworth say stuff like this make him a bad boss. It's not funny in any universe. Bender's gonna get an oil change. It happens, and Farnsworth says this is some really screwed up fluid in his body, and he's lucky he survived. Bender passed out and slept all day on the day that they surprised Hermes with robot strippers on his birthday. Bender's upset at that, and Farnsworth trusts Zoidberg to dispose of the goo, as opposed to anybody else. Zoidberg tells Fry to deliver this someplace else. Fry tells Scruffy to do something with this because he's good at trash stuff. And somehow he decides to pour it into the sewers. To be fair, there wouldn't be robots down there with the sewer mutants. But come on, I thought Zoidberg meant go on a delivery mission and throw this bag into space. Maybe into a star. Fry knows how to pilot, so he could just fly the Planet Express ship to get rid of it. The oil goes underground and onto some buried robots. And even though they're non-functional enough to be buried, that oil magically brings them back to life, and they magically burst out of the road with super strength. The kind that's so strong that the movements of their arms alone would destroy the road that would be falling towards them to bury them again. And one of them says they want boards. Despite the fact that the robot says it like zombies say brains, Zoidberg doesn't get freaked out at all and just assumes they mean board games, and wastes a ton of time talking to them because he's desperate for friends. The crew thinks it's not safe outside because of a report on the robot zombies, who would have been better explained by a magical wizard spell raising them from the dead, not to mention teleporting them out of where they were buried. Robots would be used for their scrap metal for other stuff, not buried en masse when all they need is more oil to move again. That's a waste of metal. Linda the reporter says that the robots are gonna affect people's commutes to work in the morning, even though everyone has flying cars, so they wouldn't. I agree, Bender, the news is depressing. Somehow he doesn't freak out at the news, and he's right that this doesn't make sense. And the only reason I'm making time for it is that it's Futurama. Farnsworth says he helped bury the robots because they were defective, so they were never supposed to see the light of day. That still doesn't make sense because they would have been torn apart so that their metal components would be used for materials. Farnsworth's flashback just reiterates what he already said. He was working for Mom and she decided to have the robots buried, and to buy Farnsworth's silence, she gave him the land where he built Planet Express for free. I don't think I'll accept this as an explanation for why he has this property, because it makes no sense that the robots were buried instead of used for scrap metal, which would have given her more money because she'd get paid for doing that, and save money by using the materials again. She could get paid for everything the materials would be used for, and every time they'd get sold. And Farnsworth doesn't need to get property for free. He can just sell any one of his inventions. Farnsworth blames the robots coming back to life on a virus. Still makes no sense. Robots need alcohol for fuel. They won't have the energy to move. There's no reason Scruffy would blame Leela for this. I wish it was explained that he was just joking. Forced idiot moments should only be Fry's thing. The fact that everyone is an idiot makes it overwhelming. I guess there's alcohol in the oil. Where else would it go? Bender wastes time denying the accusation that it's his fault, when really it's Scruffy's fault. And Zoidberg's fault. And Farnsworth's fault. Sure, it's his fault, but it could have been avoided by all of these people who aren't getting called out. Bender somehow went outside forgetting about the zombies, and robots invaded the room where the ship is. This robot zombie concept is sort of reminding me of the Metal Virus arc, but it's harmless by comparison because it's not turning organic people into robot zombies. And since this is a comic book, I figure the chances of Flynn intentionally taking the idea from this comic were slim to none. It'd be more likely that he took his idea from the Tales of Terror story where they basically had the Metal Virus before the Metal Virus. And even then, that's a really obscure novel. Leela says they'll be fine as long as they lock themselves in the employee lounge with no machines that might attract the robots. I guess that means they won't be fine. And sure, it's convenient that the robots can be attracted to other robots, magically figuring out where they are. Fry's a Pocket Pal robot out of complete nowhere and has to throw it out of his jacket. So if it wasn't going to be a threat to them, this was just here for a moment of cruelty to a character that's being nice to Fry. And at least Fry calls him Buddy and says he'll always remember him. Farnsworth turns on the news, and Nixon says he's declaring martial law. If the robot zombie problem isn't fixed by next week, he'll nuke the entire city. Wouldn't it have spread past the city after a week? Go figure, it's up to Farnsworth to find a cure. He should have known that. He says they need to create an antivirus using Patient Zero. He tells Leela to give her the wrist thingy. I love that's literally called that because that's what I'd called. Earlier it was called the wrist thingamajig though. She wishes they didn't have to use her comm device as fishing pole bait for the robots, when Amy has 10 phones. Amy says Leela just uses her wrist device to read ebooks about the lives of brave koalas. She needs that wrist device, and Amy shouldn't even be protesting because 10 phones is clearly excessive. Bender takes the bait and gets fished up. I love that something kind of silly happened to add levity into a tense story like this. But how is Fry strong enough to fish up someone as heavy as Bender? Maybe the fishing line glowing means that it's magnetically pulling Bender up for him. Farnsworth needs to get Bender plugged in, and the robots walk into the room with them. I guess they broke down their front door, but I wish I saw that. Wait, they should definitely have better security. Because everyone can surround their houses with metal walls for lockdown every year on Xmas. If they can do that, why didn't they do that for the robots? There's so many people here who could have thought of that, but not one of them did, just because it wasn't Xmas. I took a while to think of that, but I'm not someone who's experienced a dangerous Xmas like that every year for a lifetime. Amy makes a lame excuse when Leela wants to throw her phones at the robots to distract them. Farnsworth pulls the lever as I realize that since there aren't any robots that aren't infected here, and they can't infect organics, these people just panicked too much to realize that they weren't in any actual danger. The robots would have no reason to go after them. But Leela naturally felt like they would, because she's so familiar with zombies in the media. Farnsworth arbitrarily calls his own plan implausible, and Bender wakes up, not remembering why he's so damaged. He got cured, and since the cure is inside of him, the gurney he's on gets wheeled over to the robots. And Fry somehow thinks he'll be turned into a zombie again, when he was clearly told he's got the cure in him. It's hilarious how they're treating Bender. So the bots are gonna go back to normal, and then they'll be eaten by other zombie robots, which will cure them, and so on. If only the Metal Virus arc could have been ended that quickly. This is refreshing because a concept as dark as this is something I'm desperate to see end. So Morbo magically knows that it was thanks to Bender that the robot plague was solved, even though when robots return to normal they don't remember their time as zombies. And you'd think if anything people would assume it was Farnsworth because who else could have made an antivirus and put it in Bender? Leela thanks Bender for saving the city. What about Farnsworth's praise? Hermes says he's not such a bad guy after all, even though he was forced to go to those robots. Bender gets damaged by Fry by accident, and Fry apologizes. This story was about Leela somehow turning a black hole inside out without the explanation that a wizard spell on a part of her ship led her to it, saving Zap, and getting given his job just because of that when she isn't qualified. Then the writer forces her to make a whole bunch of dumb decisions she'd never make. After one decision that was perfectly fine, instead of actually making her act like Leela if she was the captain. So there's no point to the story. Instead of realizing that her job is harder than it looks like Kif did when he was captain, she stays confident and cheerful the whole time. So Kif calls in Zap to replace her after he placed Leela on the crew but didn't do a dangerous mission with them yet, which wastes the concept of Zap working with the crew. And he tells them all to use the mirrors to reflect the laser. Leela should have been written to feel bad about losing soldiers. And that would be a good explanation for her deciding to quit. She'd at least stress out over the fact that she's not competent enough. This story was about Bender intentionally getting sick on a robot planet to get sick days, only to find out that it's somehow evolving to be a lot more dangerous in his body. Which I just have to assume is because he's a robot from another planet. And that's also why he was immune. So because of that problem that happened easily, when his oil gets drained, for no reason Farnsworth trusts someone known to be incompetent to dispose of it. And Scruffy pours it into the sewers, where the mere presence of the oil magically causes a bunch of buried defective robots to have the energy to move and burst out of the road and rampage around as zombies. That's stupid because they wouldn't have the fuel to be able to move, and they would have been torn apart for scrap metal, turned into vacuums and stuff, which would clearly be more profitable than burying them. Not to mention they'd have to have super strength to destroy the road that'd be collapsing into them from above them after they try to escape it, so that it wouldn't bury them just by moving their arms at all. They'd never be able to get out of there, because the road would fall on them and it would reshape them so that they wouldn't be able to move. Thankfully, the depressing problem is solved in one issue after Fry catches Bender on a fishing line with bait, and Farnsworth immediately turns Bender into a living cure. Good thing that happened, because the robots effortlessly broke into the room with Farnsworth, like what happened to Tails, even though he could have put the building locked down to protect it easily.